Mainstream academia seems to downplay the miraculous nature of the Bible.
You have this very deep area here, and you have this deep area here. But at Nuweiba, that's a walkable area.
I guess the
That is
presence of
funny.
God just entered your studio. Where did they cross? Today, we're going to talk about one of the biggest and most foundational miracles of the Bible. That is the Israelites' crossing of the Red Sea. So, without any further ado, I'm going to introduce to you now Mr. Andrew Jones. Andrew?
Hey, Pastor AJ, nice to be back. Thank you for having me.
So I think we've all heard at this point how, mainstream academia seems to downplay the miraculous nature of the Bible. And some of that plays into what we're going to talk about today. But what some may not realize is that there are different views on where the location of the Red Sea crossing, yes, I said the Red Sea crossing might have been this pivotal foundational miracle of the Bible. And if you're an evangelical Christian and you're somebody who wants to take a literal view of the scriptures, obviously this is an important thing. It's a big deal because you might hear out there in the world that there's just no evidence for it. You've also got some people sort of, I don't want to say on the traditional end of the spectrum, because if you go back far enough, traditional, people believed in the Bible and they believed that this was a literal event. Others, though, have actually taken a different view of it. You had told me there was a recent article that came out. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about that article and where some of the people who don't see a kind of a large-scale miracle taking place here say that the Israelites crossed?
Yeah, they had an article in the British press, and I think other news sources picked it up. It was actually about a March 2023 study that was published in one of the scholarly journals, but it was about this study that showed the possibility that the Red Sea was due to a meteorological event, they say, something due to weather, and not because of God's power. So they took out the supernatural part, which I find interesting because based on what the Bible says, the Red Sea split because God told Moses, stretch your staff out, your arm, and then he told the Israelites to move forward into the sea. So I don't know how a natural event could happen just at the perfect timing, but everything's possible. But anyways, that was what the article was based on. That kind of got you and I talking about this topic. And I know you've been on my tours out there, so you've seen these sites too. Some of the exact same sites that these articles are talking about, and even this another site that we're actually proposing is a better place for a large-scale miracle at the Nuweiba Red Sea crossing.
Yeah, I do. I actually have a little bit of the sand from the Saudi side of the Red Sea here. So I don't know if they're going to come looking for me, but I did smuggle some of that out of the country. But I was on the tours with you there and had actually been to the traditional Sinai and then also this new proposal, or what's become sort of a new proposal in the last 50 years or so. But some of these individuals will say that because of this naturalistic explanation, the crossing site had to be in a different location, and that kind of makes it smaller scale. Where is that location that they say it happened, and what are the problems with this particular location?
Well, I think we should first look at where Midian was located and Mount Sinai, because that does affect your thinking on the available locations for the Red Sea crossing. Um, if you say the Red Sea only happened, the crossing only happened on the Gulf of Suez, or one of the lakes there, just north of the tip of Suez, then that means, yeah, you have the Sinai Peninsula as the nearest location for these mountains and the wilderness, and so that's why a lot of people say Mount Sinai is in the traditional site or near there. Now, I know there's a hybrid view. There are those who say the crossing was at one of these locations, but they also consider Mount Sinai to be in Arabia. So they take it like a hybrid approach between the two. But a lot of people who look at Sinai being in the land of Midian in Saudi Arabia, that then opens up the doors for them to consider the Gulf of Aqaba, the other branch of, the main body of the Red Sea splits, and you have this eastern branch called the Gulf of Aqaba or the Gulf of Elat. Um, and along that Gulf, there is a really good location that we'll soon be looking at that that I think fits the biblical account better, and it shows how big of a miracle it was that God did there.
Yeah,
And
like you
so,
just explained, there is sort of like a there's like a little pie slice of a peninsula that's called the Sinai Peninsula, and so the Sinai Peninsula, I think traditionally has been seen as part of Egypt. To this day, I think it's actually part of Egypt. But if you go back in time and you look at ancient maps, the Sinai Peninsula is actually part of Egypt. It's not part of modern day or ancient Midian. And so, so this, I think this is where the problem lies. The modern day understanding of Sinai being in the Sinai Peninsula means that the Red Sea crossing had to happen kind of up to the northwest of where we would place it. And that's what a lot of people seem to think. But I think it's problematic too, because there are those like David Roll, who I spoke with some time ago on this program, who kind of see the numbers of the Exodus really scaled down to the thousands as opposed to potentially the millions. And so it really alters the way we look at this miracle as a whole. And I would say there's problems with that, because you can't have a group of 10,000 people inhabiting the promised land and becoming a nation in the way that the Bible clearly describes the Israelites populating an entire region. I think also just for the fact that it was a miracle, and I'm not opposed to naturalistic explanations. I don't think you are either. But when we do that and then we put it in this particular location, I think it gives us problems. Whereas the one that we're going to look at in a little bit seems to fit the bill better.
yeah, I'm not opposed to a naturalistic, like God using nature to do his miracles and his bidding. He's the creator, so that's all possible. But when you look at like our understanding of nature just based on what you can observe, and like that's what a lot of scientific articles are about, right? Like they observe something and they're gonna test it. But that puts God in a box. Like you're basically saying, well, God had to do it this way at this location because I can explain it in the scientific article, versus if you had it at like the Nuweiba site, you're talking about 800 meters of water dividing, and it just blows your mind. Like how can that happen? Obviously, unless you're the God of the universe, you couldn't do it. It would
Yeah.
be
Hmm.
naturally impossible. So there's a mix. The Bible talks about splitting the sea. That's has to be a process that involves physics, obviously, and it talks about this eastern wind blowing. But at the same time, it also says it was a miracle. It was the deep sea, mighty depths, and enough water to drown the armies of the Egyptians. So, I think it's possible that you could say that, oh, it's only naturalistic that events happened, but when you read the full biblical account, there are things you can't explain naturally, and so I think you need to open your mind up to other locations and possibilities that would make it a true miracle. And I think that's what the Nuweiba site offers.
Yeah, I'm definitely with you on this, Andrew. Why don't you walk us through why Nuweiba Beach is probably the site of the Red Sea crossing?
Okay, well, I think if you're going to look at the proposed site of Nuweiba, you have to go back a number of years ago and see like who started this whole thing and why are people today looking at the site. Of course, I think the evidence is there, so you don't have to focus on the name of a person, but at the same time it is important to realize that it was because of this man, I'm talking about Ron Wyatt, that people go there today and are investigating it and written books about it and making movies. um, and so it was back in I think it was 77, in the late 70s that Ron Wyatt and his sons were investigating the Gulf of Aqaba. Ron had read the account of Josephus and other writers that put the Red Sea at a mountainous area, a wilderness area, and none of the sites he thought, the traditional sites, being proposed along the eastern side of the land of Egypt, fit. And so he started looking at a totally different area, but still part of the Red Sea, and that was the Gulf of Aqaba. He even rented an airplane back, during this time in the late 70s. Israel had control of the Sinai Peninsula, so he rented an airplane from Eilat and flew down the coast. And there was no Google Earth back then, so he's looking out the window, looking visually to see what he could find, and he saw the Nuweiba beach, this huge flat area that had enough room for 1 to 2 million people. Again, this larger miracle we're talking about, not a small group of Israelites migrating out of Egypt, but a large group. And he thought that would be the best location. So he decided to drive down there and check it out and go scuba diving. And so some of his exploits or adventures are written up in a book called Treasures of the Lost Races, which was published back in 1982, so kind of before he was famous or infamous. This book mentions his name, and this author, Rennie Norbergen, actually went with Ron to Nuweiba. And he mentions in this book not only about the Nuweiba Red Sea crossing being a good candidate for that, but they mentioned that then Jebel Allah could be the best candidate for Mount Sinai. And of course, that's in Northwest Arabia. And so, this was not a totally new thinking. There were some scholars back in the 1800s and into the early 1900s that were looking at mountains in Saudi Arabia and even in Jordan. There's like a dozen proposed Mount Sinai sites, but there were people looking in Saudi Arabia for Mount Sinai. And the reason being is because these people were associated Sinai with Midian. Now, if you look at the text, the land of Midian is where Moses fled to. After he had killed the Egyptian, it said he fled Pharaoh because Pharaoh wanted to kill him. And so he went and dwelt in the land of Midian for 40 years. Now, all the archaeological evidence points to this being Northwest Arabia. So on this eastern side of the Gulf of Aqaba. And even modern maps today, I got this one in Tabuk, the province capital, and it still uses the name Midian or Midian, the form of the name. And it shows that this is the mountains of Midian. This is a Saudi map. And here's another one having Midian listed along the coast down there near Sharma. Again, this coastal area along the Red Sea. And you look at biblical maps, most Bible maps will place Midian correctly in Northwest Arabia there. And then because of the archaeology, now it is difficult to associated pottery with a certain ethnic group, but you do have this painted ware that's called, that a lot of it was produced in one of these archaeological sites called Kuraira there in Northwest Arabia, one of these sites in the land of Midian. It was producing this special painted pottery that spread out up into Israel and Jordan. But you don't find any of it down near the traditional Mount Sinai site. There's a lack of evidence of a thriving society in the Sinai Peninsula, yet where the land of Midian is at, you have these communities dwelling around the oasis, and we're going to look at a couple. And so this is where Moses would have fled to. He lived in the land of Midian, outside of the area of influence for Pharaoh in the land of Egypt. So here is the route we would say Moses would have fled along, and that comes into play later when we talk about the Exodus route, because once we figure out where Sinai is and realize that God calls the Israelites to come worship him at the mountain, and he tells Moses, go bring the Israelites here, they're going to flee Egypt on the same route that Moses did until God tells them to change direction, and they end up at the Red Sea. So this route, just remember this, they cross the Sinai Peninsula, and you end up in Northwest Arabia. And it's an ancient trade route. Here's a good map showing kind of the influence and the control, the area, like the dark red is where Egypt had forts and mines in cities and towns. And then the lighter red is just like desert areas that they had influence in, and you could say maybe even controlled those areas. But you notice that the whole Sinai Peninsula was under their influence and control because they had a number of mines, especially at Serebet el-Khidam. and I've been there, and that's a copper turquoise mining area over many dynasties, even up to the after the Exodus into the 19th dynasty and later. And it's what's really interesting. A couple of years ago, 2010, I think it was, they discovered the cartouche. The cartouche is the royal name of the pharaoh it's kind of in a circle, it's like his signature. And so they found the cartouche of Ramses III over here in Tama, and that's an oasis on the kind of the outskirts of Midian. And this cartouche is the same one is used at Timnah, at the tip of the Gulf of Aqaba, right near, it's in Israel, this site. It's a copper mining site. And then the same cartouche is found on the western side over there at the start of the trade route there on the western side of the Sinai Peninsula. And so it kind of marks during the 19th dynasty this trade route that people would go along to trade goods between the Arabian Peninsula and the land of Egypt. And so it kind of marks the same route that Moses would have fled along. You know, he fled part of it to go down to Midian there. And I actually last month went and finally for the first time saw this cartouche. We went way out in the desert there, just south of Tabuk, and we had a local guide. And at first he couldn't find it, and finally he spotted it, and we were able to document this Ramses III cartouche. Now this is after the Exodus, but again, it shows that the pharaohs had marked this spot, and they were still using the trade route even past the Exodus. So we're looking at this. This is a satellite image showing the Sinai Peninsula, where the traditional Sinai is located from Mount Sinai, the Gulf of Aqaba, the main Red Sea down here, and then this northwest Saudi Arabian area that everyone agrees is Midian. And it's not just all desert out there. You know, everyone, when you think of Saudi Arabia, you think of the empty corridor with this huge sand dunes and, you know, hot desert temperatures. But Northwest Arabia is a mountainous area with many oases and valleys. And this is Al-Bada, the traditional home of Moses. And on my first trip there in 2016, we visited a farmer, and he showed us his farm, and he's growing alfalfa, and he's pumping water. This water, he said, he could dig a well and go down like 10 feet, I think it was, and pull out the water. And he was filling up these holding tanks with, you can see the water coming out there from his pump. And it was a lot of water. And so the water table there's pretty high because of the drainage system into Al-Bada. And so this is not just a modern thing. You know, the ancient writings, historical writings of this region mention a big oasis, much bigger than it was today. And so the tradition has Jethro living at this town. It was one of the best places to be in Midian. And you could say that here's a quote from a scholar talking about how the land of Midian became the city of Midian during the classical period, so the Greeks. And that name was transferred to the town of Al-Bada, which we now call Al-Bada. And so that name has never really been lost. So we can really pinpoint Midian to that northwest area of Saudi Arabia. And this is where you get the traditions of the cave of Jethro, which you saw on our tour, which are Nabatean caves, but at the same time, it shows this the locals attaching the biblical stories of the Exodus to this area of the world, not the Sinai Peninsula, but to northwest Saudi Arabia. Here's a quote from the book of Exodus talking about how Moses, when he fled Pharaoh, he went and dwelled at a well. You remember the famous scene in the Ten Commandments movie? Charlton Heston goes to a well there. He's fighting the Amalekites, I think. And Jethro's daughters, have their sheep there. Well, there's a traditional well of Moses. I don't have any photos in this presentation, but when you go there, there's a big hole in the ground, and you can see the area where, since at least the Islamic, the Middle Ages, they would associate this well as being the well of Moses, and the archaeology from that region show that they were using that well at least as far back as the Nabatean, if not before, so like the time of Christ. But whether it's that well or one nearby, the whole point is that that area was where the Midianites lived, and Al-Bada was one of the biggest oases in the land of Midian.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And, they'll show ancient maps of where Midian was, and these maps go back 2,000 years. It places it in northwest Saudi Arabia. So there is that. But in addition, I think just from like a common sense perspective, when I look at the Sinai Peninsula, it seems to me that it's not far enough from the reach of Pharaoh. Like if the Bible story happened, and if this large group of people that is a nation of people escaped out of the hands of Pharaoh and the most mighty empire in the world in that time, it would seem to me that the Sinai Peninsula just isn't that far away. If I were running, I mean, it just wouldn't make sense, in my opinion, to be in the Sinai Peninsula. I would want to get farther away, So I think there's just sort of that common sense side of things that makes me want to push Midian to a place where the Israelites could have some safety and security.
You make a very good point. In fact, we're going to look at a couple of key verses in the book of Exodus where during their journey, when they leave Sinai, or they leave Goshen, I should say, the day after Passover, it says when they get to the Red Sea, why have you taken us out of Egypt to die in the wilderness? That was a common theme that they would always accuse Moses of taking them out of Egypt to this land of leeks and onions and fish and whatever else they were eating there, and now they had to eat manna and in the desert. Well, if you look at the influence of the Egyptian Empire, that one map that had all the red on, it does seem like that traditional site of Mount Sinai is a little too close for for the Israelites to not be bothered by any of the Egyptian people or army. But if you also think about the Red Sea crossing being outside of the land of Egypt, then it fits perfectly the Nuweiba site, because there are those verses where the Hebrews, the Israelites, are saying, "Why did you take us into the wilderness?" And they're at the Red Sea crossing, accusing Moses, and they say, "You took us out of the land of Egypt, out of Egypt." I always wondered for those. We do have a graphic, this graphic showing this eastern side of the land of Egypt.
Now, those are the traditional, kind of the more traditional sites there that you had starred, correct? That's where,
yes,
at the tip of the Gulf of Suez.
Correct. Just to help everyone's geography, like I know it's difficult when you mention all these names, you don't visit this a lot. So this is the Middle East here, and you have Egypt. This is Lower Egypt up there, and then you have the two arms of the end of the Red Sea. So you have the Gulf of Suez and the Gulf of Aqaba, both considered part of the Red Sea. And then in the middle is this triangular piece of land, and today it's called the Sinai Peninsula. And the traditional Mount Sinai is down here in these southern mountains. And then in the same area, as we mentioned, there's a lot of mining activity by the pharaohs in Serbid al-Qaeda. And then you have the ancient roads going across near the coast from Egypt to Canaan and up into the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia and the Hittites and Turkey. And so that was a very important route. But along that route, the pharaohs had a lot of fortresses, and they guarded that because obviously that's the easy way for invaders to come in to the land of Egypt, was through this land bridge kind of from Canaan all the way down to Egypt. And so that way of Horus, which is, the way of Horus, Horus being one of their gods, is called the way of the Philistines in the book of Exodus. This road is a path that God said, do not travel along. And so we have it's the fastest way, though, to get to Palestine, to get to the promised land, is just take the road. But he said he took them another way to the Red Sea, via the wilderness of the Red Sea. So you have these two paths out of Egypt, and we'll talk about that briefly. But this kind of shows you how, because of all this confusion, you'll see this map like this in the back of your Bibles. It has all these different proposed routes for the Exodus, and different proposed Mount Sinai's and different proposed Red Sea crossings. And so the next slide, which you were talking about, is this one that has these stars, and they kind of illustrate, they show the different proposed Red Sea crossing sites that a lot of scholars will say happened. And it's always near Egypt. Yet the Bible talks about when they were at the Red Sea, let's say this was the Red Sea crossing, like one of these sites here, they're talking about, why did you take us out of Egypt? And it makes zero sense for the Israelites to be saying that, especially the main view right now where the Israelites crossed, that you see in Hoffmeyer's writings and David Roll's, is this star way up there close to the Mediterranean Sea. And I don't have a detailed, in their books, they have like a detailed view showing like where they think the path was, and it's going around some marshes and lakes. They say that's the wilderness, and they're outside of Egypt. But They have to get through a bunch of fortresses and cross over a canal. Um, why would Pharaoh send a big army after the Israelites if the Israelites have not even passed over the border
Yeah.
and left the country of Egypt? He shouldn't be scared. He has all these forts guarding his eastern frontier and this entrance from Canaan. He has his army stationed. There was a big area. I might be mispronouncing the site, but I think it's called Chutku. It's Tjeku, Jakku, or something like that. Anyway, it was a big staging area for the Egyptian army. They found the ovens where they baked all the bread and had the supplies for the army and the chariot, like horse stalls for the chariots. And so the Israelites are coming through that area. He didn't have to get his army ready and go after them. They haven't even left Egypt. but the biblical account says they were outside of Egypt and Pharaoh had to go after them. Um, and so it makes zero sense that any of these sites. We'll briefly go through these. So that first site up there we just talked about. Here's a closer view. This is the modern satellite image. So in ancient times, the Mediterranean Sea was more inland, and the coastal line was different. And so I should have grabbed one of the graphics from their theory, one of their books. So it's kind of hard to understand what they're saying. But this is the general area that they're saying, like Hoffmeyer and David Roll, the Red Sea. This one is Ismailia, and I'll show another view of that one in a bit. But what's interesting is Lake Timza, which is right there, and the city of Ismailia is right there. Nearby, this is where almost everyone agrees is Sukkot, the first camping site of the Exodus. Those who say the Red Sea crossing, the summer along here, they all agree that Sukkot is here. Ron Wyatt, Dr. Glenn Fritz, Dr. Leonard Moeller, and those who have Nuweiba as the Red Sea crossing, they all have Sukkot right there. So that's kind of like the general, like when the Israelites left their homes in Goshen on Passover, and then they said the next time they camp or set up to sleep is at Sukkot, and they had palm branches. So it must have been a big oasis, a lot of water. And that's what you find today, this marshy area. And so everyone agrees that that's kind of like the starting point where all the Israelites are at before they head out into the wilderness. But from there, that's where everyone changes. So, because most people now will say they went north to the way of the Philistines, but God told them not to go that way. He said they went to the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And I have a graphic coming up that will show the two ways out of Egypt and why the Israelites, believe they took the way of the wilderness across the wilderness of the Sinai Peninsula. And so, anyways, here's the other graphic or the other site. We're kind of going from north to south of these proposed locations. This is the Bitter Lake. But the strange thing is most people don't read the historical record about this region. And this was not even a lake up until the time of the Suez Canal being built. And the Suez Canal filled this in. This was a dry basin. Maybe during some rainstorms, it would get all muddy, but it was not a lake. And so people wrote about it, this being a basin. And then when they built the Suez Canal, 200-300 years ago, this filled in with water. Now you have this there's two lakes there, the Greater and Lesser Bitter Lakes. And that was
I guess the presence of God just entered your studio.
You know what? I guess
you are a man who has ascended Mount Sinai and lived to talk about it.
You'll have to. That's so startling me. I thought it was a one-time thing. I should unplug that. Yeah, now the mist. I don't know what that looks like, but leave that in the. Where's my friend?
It looks like ancient incense, or either that, or like the building is on fire. One of the two.
Yeah, we're fighting the fire. Yeah.
So real quick, Andrew, with these images you're showing us, one of the things that I notice is this is a marshy area, and like we talked about when we began, that's why some kind of dumb down, scale down the biblical miracle, because this isn't as big of a deal to cross. And I know you said that this at one point wasn't a marshy area, but even like north of that,
but the other ones,
some of that stuff, like it's not as big of a miracle. So not only are they not really fully leaving Egypt if you take the traditional location, but for some of these traditional crossing sites, it's like they walked across a marsh. It doesn't have, the 1956 Ten Commandments Charlton Heston scale to it.
Well, the strange thing is, like those who say, "Well, this is the Red Sea crossing." Number one, how are they blocked in? It talks about like in Josephus that they're
Yeah.
surrounded by mountains, or like even in the Bible, Exodus saying that they were entangled in the wilderness. How are you lost here or entangled in anything? If you drive this area today, it's a flat, mainly desert area. And like if let's say the Bitter Lakes was there instead of just being a basin, like for this proposed site, why? How are you stuck? You just go around the lake. There's nothing blocking you in. It's just this, it makes zero sense for them to be scared
God parted the
and
swampy
not
marsh.
realize. Yeah, and they could just gone to the north or south to get around it. It's not like they're stuck there. And then of course moving down south, another proposed, it's more of a classical view because it's one of the longest proposed views, or the oldest, I should say, is that was the tip of the Suez Gulf. And so somewhere in this area, there's a couple sites people have proposed, but and I had some friends who believe that, like they accept this route, but they have Mount Sinai in Arabia, so they have a hybrid view. And I like to see more of their. One guy's getting his dissertation on some of this, I believe. So I like to see more on like their understanding on it. Personally, I still go with Nuweiba, as we'll see why soon. But anyways, there are good people who believe each one of these, but I just don't think it's going to fit this big miraculous view to have the crossing that close to Egypt, to still be in the land of Egypt, and no way you're stuck here. Um, and so here's just I took this photo. It's actually two photos combined. I took it from the airplane. I had a flight from Cairo down to the tip of the Sinai Peninsula, Sharm el Sheikh, and just happened to be on a window seat on that flight. I looked out and I could see this traditional view. You can see the Suez Canal starting up there, and then this is Suez. But right here, this area where the red arrow's at, and maybe right there, those are a couple sites that people have proposed that the Israelites would have crossed. And they say, well, there's a mountain right here, and so it kind of if they got down this area, they would have been stuck. From a high level, let's say maybe 1800s map, you could consider that. I've driven this. There's a road right there you can drive.
Okay.
Even from this, you can kind of see from the airplane view. It's kind of hard though. But basically, there's like a mile wide. Maybe it's not a mile, but there's a wide enough flat area there that you can easily walk and go around the mountain and like play what do you call it, like ring around the rosy with the Pharaoh's army, but you're not stuck. There's no mountain like at Nuweiba going right to the beach and making it so you can't go anywhere and have Pharaoh's army behind you blocking you in. It just so this site itself doesn't work. And I don't. Let me see. This verse here talks. Yeah, here we go. So now we're talking about the two ways out of Egypt: the way of the Philistines, which God says He did not lead them by. Yet all these people say they went up that way. Roll in Hoffmeyer's route, and that's usually the route you see in the Bible today. And then it says though that He led them the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And so now, again, I'm a visual person, so I got to see that on a map. So we're looking again. This is kind of a different view because you're looking east towards Israel over there, the Dead Sea. Here's the Gulf of Aqaba, land of Midian and Saudi Arabia. And then here's the Suez Gulf, and down that's Goshen down there, the land of Egypt. And so along this eastern border, where I kind of put those red dots, they had canals and forts, and they had to control that eastern frontier because they didn't want people just coming in and taking over their land. Armies or just
I would
migrants.
think so.
So yeah, kind of like everyone wants a border wall in the south along the southern part of the U.S. border. Well, they were concerned about their border too back in the ancient Egyptian times, and so they had forts there and canals as barriers. So there's two main ways out of Egypt during this time period. The green arrow, that's what we would call the way of the Philistines. Now that's the shortest way to get to Israel. The Egyptians in their literature, they call it the way of Horus. And during the Greeks, they call it the Via Mara, I think, the way of the sea, a coastal route. But the Egyptians had all these forts built along that route. And so the next way out is kind of where we were talking about Lake Timza, the proposed Sukkoth camping site, the very first place the Israelites encamped and made booths out of palm branches and these temporary dwellings. That's the starting point. And it says that God took them that way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And so to understand why would you call it like where's the wilderness of the Red Sea? That is that whole area out there, what we call today the Sinai Peninsula. And it's between the two branches of the Red Sea. Here's a map I made, kind of illustrating the route we're proposing. That this is from Ron Wyatt, and then others have picked up on it and done more research, like Dr. Glenn Fritz, Leonard Muller. And so, anyways, I think before I get to that verse, I thought I had a slide about kind of illustrating the route, but I guess that was all I had. Anyways, so if you look at the biblical account, it's after they leave Egypt that God then tells them to change direction. And it says, and that change of direction gets them at the Red Sea. But this only happens after they left Egypt. Because when they're at the Red Sea crossing, the Israelites are complaining that you've taken us out of Egypt. They're accusing Moses to die in the wilderness. And so along this proposed route that we're talking about, this ancient trade route from Egypt to Saudi Arabia that Moses fled and that Ramses III, his men marked, this route, it would have taken the Israelites all the way to Midian. They would just, it's like a natural highway. People used it all the time. But right before they would get to Midian, God said, change your direction. It's
And
really
Moses,
that
I didn't mean to interrupt you, Andrew, but Moses actually had been there. So he would have known how to get to Midian, and it would make sense that they would have been traveling. Obviously, Moses didn't go through the parted sea when he fled Egypt the first time, so he would have went the way that was natural to him to get back to Mount Sinai where God told him to go.
That was probably why, exactly, and that's probably why God had to tell him, change direction. Moses is thinking, why? Because the natural way, I've been on this route to and from Midian, and why are we changing direction? They're following the cloud, but God had to tell them to change direction. Otherwise, they would just naturally keep continuing around the Gulf, following this, you can call it modern highway, this trade route that's well known. But he said change direction. Now, the interesting thing is, there's only one area along this Gulf of Aqaba, Red Sea body of water that has a big enough beach that has one way onto it that comes off of this ancient trade route where you have to change direction to get to. And that one beach is called today Nuweiba. And so that's why, there's other beaches along the Gulf, but this one here has has everything matching. There's not some of that matches, but other stuff we have to figure out how it would work. Every point from the biblical record and what the historians have wrote later on about the Red Sea crossing, like Josephus, fits at Nuweiba. We're going to quickly go through some of that. But first, the biblical account talks about them being lost in the wilderness or shut in. Wandering in the land, wilderness has shut you in. I've seen some really interesting theories for the traditional list, those who say it's up by those lakes, like David Roll and Dr. Hoffmeyer. David is also, I should say, he's a doctor too, an Egyptologist. So these guys, even with all their degrees, they have to figure out how this fits in their path. And I've been driving, I drove that area up there, and you have to wonder, how are you lost in the wilderness? How are you shut in when you just left Goshen, maybe 30 miles away or less, and you're still you haven't crossed over the border canals or the border forts, and so Pharaoh has no reason to be concerned that you're going to escape. His army's right there. So again, this verse is key, and it doesn't fit the geology or the geography of that area of the eastern side of the land of Egypt, the traditional Red Sea crossing sites. But if you look at this mountainous area by the coast of the Gulf of Aqaba, there's this one, they call it a wadi in Arabic, which is a valley system or canyon. It's a natural roadway that you could use to march through and walk through. So there's this one canyon system that leads off of that trade route and ends up at a huge beach called Nuweiba. And this is a modern name for this as Wadi Watir. Now here's a quote from Josephus, and he talks about how the Israelites, the Hebrews, were driven into, they came into this area because, God told them to change direction, and they ended up at this narrow area. There's nothing like this along the lakes and the traditional sites where you're stuck. And so here's a satellite view of the Nuweiba beach. You can even visually see that canyon system that goes into the interior of the Sinai Peninsula to the traditional, or I should say, to the trade route that goes to Midian in Arabia.
And they're hemmed in at that location, correct? By the mountains. If they get there, you can
You're hemmed
see
in, yeah.
how that fits with
You
how
are
they would be hemmed
hemmed in.
in. And you even see the
Here's a
path that they
3D
took to get
Google
to the
Earth.
beach as well.
Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. I think, in fact, on your tour that you were on, we drove part of it. Like we went down into it, and you can see you're in this canyon system. This is a photo I think Ron took. It's really good view up on one of the side of the canyon. But you're looking out, you can kind of see it. I can see it better probably on my end, but you can see the mountains of the wilderness of Shur, but in Midian, in northwest Arabia over there, and that's the Gulf of Aqaba. So this canyon system leads to this huge beach, and you can see how you're hemmed in. Josephus talks about how like the mountains to the south block them. In fact, the whole area you're blocked. Now, I've seen a couple of people who, again, everyone has their view of where the Red Sea crossing happened, and one individual would say that, oh, well, you're not really hemmed in here because there's these roads you can take out. In fact, we drove the southern road from St. Catherine on your tour coming in. Well, it's funny that these guys will say that, but they won't go to like on the ground here and talk to the locals and do some historical research, find out that all these roads were mainly built by the Israelis in the 70s. And they say before that, the only way onto here that you could like take a road in was the Wadi Watir. And these other ones were just like narrow gorges and canyons they didn't use for anything. And even the road today going along the coast, you'll see it on some maps that there's a road. It's a modern road that goes from Nuweiba all the way up to the Israeli border, the modern border at Taba and Elat. And when you drive that road, I've driven it many times and taken a lot of photographs. But that road is cut into the mountainside. Without that cutting and taking away the mountain, that mountain would have gone right into the sea and blocked any way north. So you're literally stuck here unless you would have go back the way you came. But the Israelites couldn't because the Egyptian army was right behind them. And so the modern roads don't tell the true story. But so in ancient times, Wadi Watir was the only way onto this beach. It's kind of a highlight that the red line there. Here I'm standing in the canyon. Now, some people propose that Pihi Harath, I hope I said that right, the name that Moses wrote down for the Israelites coming down and camping in front of, they say that because it means the mouth of a gorges or canyon is one proposed meaning for that Hebrew word, that refers to Wadi Watir. And you can see this canyon system. It's a very pronounced or visual thing you see there. Like you can't miss it. It's on a small canyon. Now back to Josephus. Here, his quote about the mountains terminating at the sea. Now show me any mountain up by those lakes. It's all flat. It's marshland or sand dunes or a farmland. There's no mountains terminating at the sea at those traditional Red Sea crossing sites. Now they're at the tip of the Gulf of Suez. We talked about one of those classical sites, but even that mountain doesn't terminate at the sea. There's a wide, and I've driven there. There's a modern road. We stopped and filmed it. There's a wide enough part where I don't know if it's a mile or a little less than a mile wide, but it's big enough that masses of people could walk around that mountain. Again, Nuweiba, you don't have that. Nuweiba, it terminates. All the mountains go right to the sea, and you're stuck there. Here's again the same map, but kind of again illustrating what Josephus wrote. Now he was 1,500 years after the Exodus.
That beach is large enough to hold like a lot of people. I mean, from the picture, it looks like a small beach. That's a huge beach right there that can easily accommodate 2-3 million Israelites.
Yeah, I have a photo. We're down at the southern end where Ron Wyatt was scuba diving, looking for chariot wheels and such. At that southern end, you can see how massive. Like these are the trees, and these are the mountains. It's massive. It's very impressive when you're there. You can see like a wall. These mountains are hemming you in. You have the Red Sea in front of you, and one way that you came in on the Wadi Watir. That now the Egyptian army is coming in after you, and so no, I forget how many thousands of acres are there. I once calculated, and I don't want to say it because I'll probably get it wrong, but on Google Earth, like if you have the application, you can it'll give you the acreage if you want. You can like draw a polygon, and I want to say it was like 10,000 acres, but it was a lot.
Yeah, it's big.
We've gotten some really nice views. Actually, it's kind of hard in this projector to see, but
wow.
At a certain time of the year, you can be in Saudi Arabia, and you can actually get a photo with the sun going down between the canyons in Wadi Watir.
Wow,
so kind of a cool shot. Here's one from a boat where we actually take some of our time on our tours. We take people out on the boat at sunset, and you're actually taking, not too far off the beach, but you're on these little fishing boats that are rocking back and forth, and you're looking back and you see the sun set in between that canyon. And it's very similar view of when the Israelites were there, because it happened at night that the Red Sea crossing occurred. So the sun set, and they were scared to death that they're stuck here with the Egyptian army coming. Now, this is Hollywood, but it kind of, for me, I'm very visual. Just imagining this big miracle happening. Here's an animated GIF I found online. I don't know who did it.
Is that AI
but
that made that?
No, this was actually before that became popular.
Okay.
This might be a clip from one of the movies, or someone just made it, like the hard way back. This was like 5 or 6 years ago, I think.
I've
But
seen some
anyway,
funny AI pictures of Moses and the Israelites recently.
doing selfies.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Thinking about what if they had cell phones back then? They wouldn't have gotten lost, that's for sure. They would have Google Earth. But if you think about Nuweiba versus the marshlands, and we talked about this big miracle versus a small miracle, and just wading through the marshes. Well, this is kind of what it'd be like for Nuweiba, because Nuweiba is 850 meters deep in the middle, but much deeper on both sides, especially the south side of Nuweiba. So there's this walkable path that I call it. And it's not an underwater cliff. You don't need rappelling rope to get down, and it's the only place in the Gulf of Aqaba we have these large beaches to for the Israelites to camp on, and then a walkable path underground under the water to walk when the water is removed.
And I think this is an
deep.
important point, because this to me is one of the biggest evidences. You've got a way that they can cross. And you don't have that in other locations. Yeah,
and I have a graphic coming up shortly that will compare, especially for the Gulf of Aqaba. Like there's no other place. Like let's say there are other beaches along the Gulf, but you don't have a way off the trade route to get to it. Or if you take the water out from in front of where you're at, it's a cliff. Like you take the water, what are you going to do? Like climb down the cliff with your children and your flocks and sheep, and you can't. But this one, everything fits. I mean, there's not like one big issue. The only issue you could say is that it's deep. It's 850 meters in the middle. But to me, because it was a mighty miracle that the Bible describes, and talking about the waters of the deep, God can easily just say the word, and if He can create the world by just pronouncing something, He can split the sea. So to me, it's not a problem. And this red arrow here on this new slide that is put up, it shows where they went from Nuweiba. You can see how big that beach is. It has thousands of acres. As you come over here to the Saudi Arabian side, where we take tours to, and as you saw too on your tour, that this is it's a much bigger beach area. So you can't you have to find a Red Sea crossing where when they left this side and they go over, they don't hit a bunch of mountains. Like you can't come up and there's no place for us to go. We have to mountain climb. But no, the Saudi side is a perfect place to receive the Israelites, so to say. That they come out of the sea and they end up here. And it says, in Exodus chapter 15 that they had a big, party. Basically, they danced and Miriam was singing, and everyone was so, happy and excited. And the bodies of the Egyptian army was floating on the coast there. So you do have even the Saudi side fitting for this Red Sea crossing route.
To me, that underwater pathway is really that's a big evidence there.
Yeah, let me
would that be a coincidence that along that whole stretch of the Gulf of Aqaba, there's nowhere where they could have crossed except for Nuweiba, and you could even picture the way Wadi Watir empties out onto the beach. That's a place where the pillar of fire could have easily withheld Pharaoh's army, because they would have all been log jammed in Wadi Watir.
Yeah, in fact, that's the key point of the story. There's a lot of details in the Exodus account, but I'm glad you brought that up, because it talks about the pillar of fire that was usually in front of the Israelites, this cloudy pillar at day and a fire by night, that guided them where to go, like their GPS compass. It moved. It was a miracle. So you see this pillar, and it goes behind the Israelites and separates them from the Egyptian army to keep the two away from each other while the Israelites are escaping through the Red Sea crossing. And so that pillar could have blocked them right in and stopped the Egyptians at that choke point. Wadi Witir. Now, you mentioned about the underwater path. Now, up until recently, the best bathymetric map of the made of this area, now bathymetric map is like underwater topography, showing the landscape under the water. But the best map was made by the Israelis in the 1970s. In the 1990s, I was in college, and I was really really into this a lot. So I actually contacted the Israelis, and because someone said you should contact a certain doctor. His name's on the map. I forget his name now. Oh, John Hall. He's still alive. I don't know if, this was mid '90s. I don't know if there was email back then or not, but I faxed him or emailed or whatever, and he actually mailed me like a big tube I got from Israel. I was like, oh, what's this? I opened it up for free. He sent me all these charts that he had made with his other colleagues of the Mediterranean and the Gulf of Aqaba. And now this is online for free. Like they digitized it, but back then I had this big paper map rolled up. It was really special to me because, as a kid or someone in college, this Israeli scientist actually mailed me a free map of the Red Sea crossing. And it shows, like you're saying, like Nuweiba is the only spot. I'll zoom into Nuweiba, but I wanted to show though the rest of the Gulf that like these other places where there could be like a little beach, Dahab. Sharm el Sheikh is another proposed site by Bob Cornuke and I'm going to get the guy's name. He runs Bible.ca. Steve Rudd. He wrote a good book. Now he believes Sinai's in Arabia, but he puts the crossing down by the Straits of Tiran, which I've been out on a boat, and you can see though there's problems with it. And I'll show you some charts comparing all these sites that Dr. Glenn Fritz made. And again, Nuweiba is the only one that has a walkable path, no underwater sea cliffs, no issues with the underwater topography. The Israelites and their carts and animals and children can walk only at Nuweiba. And so here's a close-up of Nuweiba, again, from the Israeli chart, kind of give you that visual effect going across the sea there, zooming in. Now, as the lines are close together, that means it's a cliff. So over here, it's really steep because that's the contour lines. That's how you read the map. The more spread out they are, that means it's more gentle to slope. Again, this is Saudi Arabia. That's Nuweiba, Egypt over there. Here's a kind of an angled view. All the views you can get. Now, I've overlaid on the Israeli chart this other map made by, I think this was a German survey vessel where they did more high resolution sonar scans of the mountain. And from their scans, we can actually look at the angle of descent, like the ramp they walk down into the water. And it's walkable. It's not an underwater cliff like you have along a lot of the Gulf of Aqaba. And this is actually from a recent Saudi survey they did, and they were looking at the fault lines because this is Aqaba is part of the Rift Valley, that part of the earth where it's ripped open all the way from Ethiopia up to like Sea of Galilee, and so it goes along the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aqaba, and so in there, they've had earthquakes along there. In 1995, Nuweiba had a really big earthquake. Anyways, their survey shows this walkable path, that it's not an underwater cliff there. Now here's from Dr. Glenn Fritz's books. I do recommend his material. He studied this a lot, and he shows the angle of ascent and descent, and that it's walkable. You look at the degrees here, going down at 6 degrees. I'm looking at this without my glasses, so 7.4 degrees there. So it is a walkable, and then here's the chart I was telling you about, where it compares these different areas.
Okay, so the top one on this chart is Nuweiba.
Is Nuweiba.
Okay.
You can see it's a gentle slope walkable.
Yeah.
The other two are further down, like Dahab, which is a famous dive area, but has a little beach there. But let's say you can walk it, but you get to the Saudi side, it's like a cliff on these two here. Obviously, the Aragonese Deep is really deep. It's like, how many meters down in the middle. That's why Nuweiba is just north of there, and then south is a huge deep area. So that's why it's a walkable path. You have between the Elat Deep north of Nuweiba and south. Just go back a couple slides so you can see what I'm talking about. You have these, I'll just get up here and lecture like this. You have this very deep area here.
Need a pointer.
And you have this deep area here. And in between the two deep area is this like sill, this little valley that's higher up. It's 850 meters deep, so it's still deep. But at Nuweiba, that's a walkable area. all these other ones you can see, like why it's black, because the contour lines are so close, meaning it's a cliff. And that's like, here's Hackle right over here. And so right out of Hackle, it just drops off. And then here, as you go down, this is that Argonese Deep. I was saying that he drew that Glenn Fritz was comparing Nuweiba, Argonese, Dahab, and then straight to Turan, which is a proposed crossing site. So if we're going to look at, so we can briefly talk about that, because that is a crossing site, some have said, for the Gulf of Aqaba. And if you look at, when we compare it, it has a huge issue with the underwater topography. You have to somehow get rid of this. It's not too deep. It's, I think, 300 meters or 100 meters. I mean, I don't know if it's 300 feet or 300 meters, but either way, the angle of the descent into that little trough is like scaling a cliff. So,
and I think people would have to, I'm sorry to interrupt you. People would have to realize that the Israelites were not an army. These weren't like Navy SEALs traveling and climbing up these, up and down these locations. They were elderly, women, children, this was a nation of people, and a lot of them, the only place they could have crossed is Nuweiba. If you're looking at the Gulf of Aqaba.
That's what we're hammering.
It's the only place.
We're showing you, we're kind of getting everyone's head like over and over, from the underwater topography, from the above, the aerial photos showing the mountains, the big beach, the one-way into the area. Only Nuweiba fits. It's not like maybe it doesn't fit or not. No, it fits. This is has a little illustration here.
You're blowing up the other canyons.
We're burning a hole in the theory. Now, here's a great view. So we've been the only group that has been out on boats. Sadly, the Saudis don't allow this anymore, but we've taken tour groups out there on the Saudi side on a boat, and we've done research too, like bringing our equipment. They always check our bags coming and going, because this is a known drug route from Egypt, and so they want to see what we found out in the water. But we've gotten drones out there, and underwater sonar, and underwater drones too. But I flew this one off the boat, and so you're way out there. And you can even see the gradual effect of, this is looking over towards Nuweiba. So this side is Saudi Arabia, and you can see all this coral and how shallow it is. It just gradually goes underwater. It's very walkable. This was on March and May of 2019, so right before the pandemic. We were on this boat. Here's my GPS mark. So we were going all through there. Now, of course, they don't allow you to go too far out to international waters in the Gulf, but there's some areas like our sonar would pick up and show like, oh, that's not walkable. This angle is 47-degree angle. Like almost a cliff. So I'll jump back to some other things here. I just want to briefly mention, besides what we looked at, like geography and the historical writings talking about the mountains surrounding them, and the Exodus route following the ancient trade route. Ron went scuba diving on the Nuweiba site, and he claimed, I've never seen them, but he claimed to have seen different chariot parts, mainly wheels, that were preserved because of the coral. Or he claimed, like in this case, this is a screenshot of one of his videos, that that he had found gold, and he said, gold doesn't corrode or decay, and so it still lasts. But he said it was very fragile and thin, so he left it there. A lot of people try to find this again. Sadly, Ron has passed away, so we don't know the exact spot off of Nuweiba. But these are his photographs. So for him, he talked a lot about the chariot wheels out there. I usually don't talk about what I can't see myself, so I don't dwell on it. It's a possibility. People have attacked these a lot, saying, "Oh, you're just looking at coral. That coral would not preserve stuff like that. Like wooden object would decay fast." Other objections are like these are valves from a ship. The metal, like from recent vessels, the valves would turn things. I do know what you can see in museums. These are ancient chariots. You might have seen these too, and this is in the Cairo Museum. I think we did stop at that museum on our tour. So you can see the style of chariots back then. These are 6-spoke wheels. Like this was a 4-spoke one. But at any rate, I don't know whether, people talk about this a lot. It's a great way to get people to watch your video by saying you found underwater chariot parts. So I just know Ron's story. I don't think he lied, or maybe he misinterpreted some of the coral, but I do find some of the stuff interesting enough that it got him to keep going. Whether he interpreted all the data correctly, and whether chariots would have been preserved all these years, that's another question. But we don't. To me, we don't need to find like a perfectly preserved wheel to prove it's the Red Sea crossing. You can look at the geography, the geology, the historical documents. Um, Anyways, so that was a little side thing about the chariot parts because everyone always asks that about Nuweiba. Um, in regards to, and we kind of briefly talked about this on the Saudi side, this huge beach. You've been and I've been on there. It's a huge area that the Israelites would have come out of the sea and been here and then started their journey. Again, here's the Saudi beach looking over. You can see Nuweiba over there in the distance, about 8 miles across, 9 miles. Um, and then when you're here, you're not stuck. You can't just be on a beach and then stay there forever. It said they went to Mount Sinai. Well, there are two big wadi or valleys that lead off that beach into the interior of Midian. And we've driven both wadis now. One has a big road that's been constructed, a paved road you can drive for the NEOM project. These photos were taken before any of the roads were put in. And so, yeah, I think that covers most of my slides. And so just to sum up, I have 2 slides summing it up. The first thing I wanted to point out about this whole discussion, comparing this site to the traditional sites up there along the eastern side, the marshlands, they're outside of Egypt, literally. Pharaoh didn't have to worry about catching up to them on the other ones, but this one he did because they're outside of Egypt. And that's exactly what the Israelites said in Exodus chapter 14. They complained to Moses, "Why do you take us out of Egypt?" Now, how do they get to that site? Well, it's off the main trade route to Midian. So if your Mount Sinai is near or in the land of Midian, then this is a natural path you would have taken, this trade route to Midian. And now it suddenly makes sense why God said to change direction, and that will take you to the Red Sea or the Gulf of Aqaba. So, this turning back leads you to Nuweiba, the only part or only beach that allows you to do that off the trade route. It's surrounded by mountains, just like Josephus talks about. You have 0 mountains at the Bitter Lakes, the Timza, and those other places that Dr. Hoffmeyer and Dr. Roll talk about. That's usually in the back of your Bibles. And then just to be clear, Josephus even says the mountains to the south block them. And you have that in Nuweiba, that southern area, in the northern area. It's all surrounded by mountains, and both sides go right to the beach. Like you can't get around them. Masses of people couldn't do it. And now, what about the underwater bathymetric data? Yeah, Nuweiba is the only spot it's walkable. Like you get rid of that 800 meters of water, you still have a gradual descent and ascent on the other side. The other places you don't. Straight to Tehran, even though it's not as deep, you do have these cliffs, and you have to somehow get rid of those cliffs. And then on the other side, as we saw from the photographs, is a large beach to receive the Israelites. And so again, there's only one spot on the Gulf of Aqaba that fits, and it's Nuweiba. And so that is why our focus has been on the research and on taking people to see these sites has been Nuweiba. But we do take people to some of the traditional sites so they can see like Sinai and Bitter Lake crossing sites. But I do recommend, if you really want to dive deep into this, if you go to ancientexodus.com, Dr. Glenn Fritz has a couple books out. His dissertation, this book is based on his dissertation. And then you have his really new book that's really thick, that has hundreds of photographs. And I helped him with some of the photographs on this one. But there's PDF versions too if you just want to buy the electronic copy. And then if you want a lesser scholarly view that's more readable, but just as good, I think, and this one, it's not in print, but you can find used copies. Sadly, Dr. Mueller passed away a number of years ago, but I think the PDF you can buy off the website that his organization has kept running. And so, yeah, these are really good. It's kind of hard sometimes to explain it all. I showed a couple slides, but if you're really into figuring this out, these are really good resources to read along with your Bible that can help explain.
Yeah, that's awesome, Andrew. For me, it just kind of all lines up. You've got the historical side of things with where the land of Midian was. You've got the geography of the Red Sea crossing site at Nuweiba, which, to me is just, it's too much for coincidence. Whether or not the chariot parts are there or not, I agree with you. I think that's kind of irrelevant. There's also the size of the Israelite nation and, you know, how many people it would take to populate the promised land. That would certainly be a lot more than 10 to 20,000 Israelites. I mean, God wiped out that many in, you know, various plagues through the time that they were in the wilderness. I mean, there would have been none left to go, you know, populate the promised land there if that were the case. So I think you make a good case, and I know that you take people to these locations. So how can somebody join one of your tours?
Yeah, I know, people who can travel or can afford it, they want to see the sites. And that was me. I first heard about this, I couldn't go, but so I would watch and read everything I could about it in high school. And then finally, when I could go, I think my first time to Nuweiba was in 2000. And I just kept coming back. And then people wanted to come on my trips. I said, okay, let's make this a tour. So that's kind of how that all started. But if they want to join us, we do have tours come up in April, maybe May, but then it gets start getting hot. But we definitely have an April date coming up. And we also do private tours. So you just want your family or a group of church members, and only your group. We do schedule those in. So those dates aren't listed on our website. You just email us. So go to our website at discoveredsinai.com, and there's a contact page there. Also all the details about the tour and the itinerary and all that. But we also custom design things if you want to say longer or shorter. We had a couple ladies come out in October, actually the day the Israeli-Hamas war started. They crossed over that morning into Saudi, and we did a one-day tour. Usually we do 5-day tours out there with the 6-day for climbing, but they want to see everything. All they had was 1 day extra. So I said, I'm in the area. So we drove around really fast and took a lot of pictures. So that was great. But yeah, come join us. People ask, is it safe in Saudi Arabia right now? Our tours, there's a lot of companies doing tours of Israel, so we don't usually touch on that. But for Egypt and Saudi, we've been doing these tours since September for this year, or last year, I should say, all the way to December. So September, October, November, December, I've been in and out of Egypt and Saudi Arabia multiple times. No problems. Everyone there is telling us, please tell everyone to come. It's safe here. So again, we've had zero safety issues, and we would like to show you guys these sites if you want to see it.
Yeah, it is definitely a major faith builder. And I took my 13-year-old son with me last year. He's going to be 15 here in a couple of days, but he was only 13 at the time, and it was fantastic. I thought the people were really nice.
Did you guys climb like the fastest up to the top?
We did. We were trying to set the record. I think we might have. I know. Keith Johnson was pretty impressed.
He was 80, but
yeah, he called my son Spider-Man. That was my son Jake's unofficial nickname. But God bless you, Andrew. Thank you so much, man. And I think a lot of compelling information there. I hope people will consider it, and I guess we'll see you in the next video. Make sure to like and subscribe, everybody.
I've already told you about my recent trip to the Middle East and the real Mount Sinai in Saudi Arabia, but what you may not know is that you can experience these things for yourself, and it's all made possible through our friends and ministry partners at discoveredsinai.com, where Andrew Jones and his team will take you on an adventure of biblical proportions to places like Noah's Ark, the pyramids of Egypt, the real Mount Sinai and Red Sea crossing site, the split rock of Horeb, Elijah's cave, Sodom and Gomorrah, and Jerusalem. I can't emphasize enough just how incredible this opportunity is. It will be life-changing for you and your family. And here's the cool part. You can do the whole tour or just book the individual things you'd like to see. And the prices are amazingly reasonable for this all-inclusive spiritual experience. Book your tour today at discoveredsinai.com.
Hey, there's one more thing I've got to share with you. I want you to know that you know Jesus and that you will one day be resurrected and spend an eternity with him. The Bible says that all those who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. That all you need to do is confess Jesus with your mouth and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead. So just say this prayer with me right now. Lord Jesus, I am a sinner and I need a Savior. I believe that you died for my sins and that you were raised to life 3 days later. Make me born again in my heart through the power of your Holy Spirit, and help me to live for you all the days of my life. In Jesus' name, amen. If you said that prayer, you are saved. Now go get yourself a Bible so that you can begin to develop godly habits in your life. And make sure to join a Bible-believing local church where you can be baptized as an outward symbol of what God just did in your heart. If you don't have a copy of the Bible, send us a message and we'll get one to you. Welcome to the family, friend.